Welcome back to the Realty Report. Welcome, everybody. Friday night, February. Let's get this party started. Let me welcome in my brother from another mother, Mr. Tony Silo. Tony, what do you got going on, brother?
Nothing much. He's very excited to be here tonight with our main man, Jimmy DeMonica. He's a great guy, friendly. I mean, he just makes you remember the good times in any life. But he gives you such knowledge and history of this life. It's great. I mean, it's really wild. And we're going to get into a couple of nice topics tonight. And we're going to continue every week as we do.
Absolutely. Let me just shout out the chat. Cinnamon Girl, Kelly, Dave T, whoever's here right now. Terry, welcome aboard again. Barbara, we just spoke before. How are you, Barbara Materna? Joey Blunts, what's up, Joey? Good to see you back. Good to see you back. With further ado, I want to make sure I didn't miss anybody. And I think we're good to go. So let's get this party started. Without further ado, Joe. Good evening, Joe. Good to see you, bud. Let's bring on our friend and partner, Mr. Jimmy D. Jimmy, what is happening? How are you tonight, my friend?
Very good, very good. How are you, Craig? Hi, Tony. How are you?
How are you, Jim?
Good,
Always
guys.
A pleasure,
Good,
brother. Always a pleasure, Jim. Always.
Yes, you guys are the man of the hour, the men with the power, the men that are too sweet to be sour, and you got more moves than a bowl of Jello.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Keep it coming, brother. Keep it coming. Can't get enough of that.
I love it.
See no evils in the house. Welcome aboard. Tone, being that everybody seemed to love the format we kind of went with, and it seemed to work beautiful. Nobody talking over each other. Tone, how about you take it from here? I'll have some input when I feel.
So, guys, as you know, Jimmy DeMonica was eventually brought into the labor union, and we're going to get into that tonight. And his dad was there also. And when they got in there, his dad was not a MAID member yet, but we're going to get into a little bit when he became MAID. But we're going to get into Jimmy's, entrance into the labor unions and how it started and how he rose to power there, and we're really, it's really good stories and they're real stories, and everybody knows it. We haven't had one negative comment now in the 4 weeks I'm involved with these interviews, and I think they're great. And I'm glad Jimmy's a personal friend. Craig, you're like my brother, and we're going to go from there. So let's say hello to Jimmy. How are you tonight, Jim?
Very good, T. Good to hear from you again.
Always. Okay, so let's get it right away, get started. Jim, why don't you tell us about your entrance into the labor world with your dad, and you and your dad in the labor's union?
Well, it first started in the late 80s because I was always looking. I remember I went away in the late 80s. I had to go promoting gambling. I was at after-hour clubs, and I used to be a dealer. And so I had to go away. I remember one time it was for a couple of, one was 90 days, another one was 9 months, minuscule stuff, which is nothing. But when I came out, I still had to have a job. So at that time, CABERT had the union with our friend Tony. He was the business manager for Local 342. So my father was away at the time, but he was in the midst of coming home. He was ready to come home. So they sent me down there, and I went to work as a laborer. I think at that time, I think it was $18 an hour, or some plus your benefits and all that. So I did that for a while, and then come 1989, my father gets released. He came home after doing 8 years at the time, which is one of the many times he was away. And we both worked as laborers in Budweiser. So me, as you can see, my hair is still the way it was. But when I was young, it was real dark, real high and back, and real perfect coif. I had a nice haircut. And so I wouldn't, anytime I had a chance not to wear my helmet, because it would ruin my haircut, I wouldn't wear my safety helmet. So we're working at Budweiser, and the shop steward, Larry, was there, and he said, yo, put your fucking helmet on now. So I looked at him. I said, so, who are you talking to, So we had a break for lunch, and we didn't get a chance to get into anything then. Everybody went their separate ways because you only had like a half hour or whatever. So on the way home, as we're leaving the yard, I told my father, because we were on the same job. I says, Dad, this guy, he's motherfucking me across the whole yard, making a jerk out of me like for a helmet. He goes, what? Because my father was an ex-fighter. He went in there. He says he went right into the trailer where Larry had his desk, and he stood over his desk. He says, "You're cursing my son?" And what? So Larry stood up as if to say, "Yeah." Like, well, what are you gonna do? My father went bang. He hit him here, and all the inside meat to his upper lip was hanging like and swinging like a pendulum. And with that, he was all dazed. He's going, "What did you do?" He started. My father ran out to get some bricks, to hit him with some bricks. And so Larry ran out after. So when Larry ran out, I grabbed him and I started pounding him, his head off the ground, and my father is kicking him in the head. So there was another guy there at the time. He's dead now. It was Joe and Sabella with these guys, with your friends, T. And he's going, Juice, leave this guy alone. You're making me sick. I'm going to get sick. Will you keep doing this? Because he wanted to stay in the job. Because this guy was like, he was just there just for the short paydays and robbing all the copper, all of the copper and all the stainless steel. So but he really wasn't behind real men. We didn't really like that. So my father kept kicking Larry in the head. Anyway, the next day we have to go see Tony in his office. And Tony says, well, look, he says, Juice, you guys are men, but I got to put you on a different job because it'll look bad if you just go back there. But I forgot to tell you, as I was giving the guy the beat, when I finally walked out the yard, some of the kids, the workers were with me, said, Jimmy, you and your father aren't afraid of nobody. I says, no. I says, he goes, yeah, but what if you don't have a job anymore? Tony takes you off the job. I says, what? I said, I'll be running this thing in 2 years. Sure enough, I was, but it took me 3 years.
Okay, now when your dad was away, go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, what, Tony?
When your dad was away, by any chance, was it a state or a federal charge?
No, he was away on the state that time.
Did he happen to spend time in Caldwell at that time?
No, not my father. No, he was never equipped for Caldwell. I was in Caldwell.
Okay,
that's where I did my time.
Somebody's asking. That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, I got
no, it. My father was in Leesburg, which was in southern New Jersey, with Millville, or it was what was it? Southern State Prison, which was next to Leesburg. And my father did 8 years there. He went away in 82 and came home in 1989. It was roughly 8 years or so. First, he went away in Atlanta, Georgia, federal from 1974 to 1980, and that's where Carmine Persico was his cellmate at the time. And that's how I got to be close at the time with Allie Boy and Carmine's son and all that. I would go upstate to Carmine's house up in Saugerties, upstate New York. Wow, you want to see the wealth this guy had. 275 acres, 60 horses they owned, the tennis courts. Remember, Allie Boy says to me, he says, help Cousin Carmine take out some, it was Labor Day weekend. It was a party, like a cookout, They must have had 200 people there. So when he says, help them get out some sodas, I'm figuring, what would it take? Like, a couple of 6-packs? It took an hour and a half to get all the sodas on hand trucks to actually put them all on ice. The money, oh God, it was a frightening amount of money. It was really something. But getting back to the Union, the way how we acquired the power of the Union was, now you're talking around 89, my father gets straightened out. And that's when CABERT and Tony, the guy Tony Proto, went away. They both went away together on the same case. They did about 8 years. But during that time, Tony's son was holding the spot as business manager at the time. But my father from New York was then given the blessing of, he got the union. He got Local 342 to control. So I would be with my father then. But then again, at the same time, he never really introduced me as his right-hand man. there was another kid that was there. I don't know why, but that's how it worked. But then 2 years later, like around 92, I'm sorry, around 94. This was around 92. My father got it. Because by the time Tony actually went away, they had their case in 1990, 91, but then they actually went away, I think, in 92. Thus, my father took over around 92, and about a year and a half later, my father went away on a parole violation. That's when we got locked up in Maryland for robbing all the stores. We robbed a pharmacy in Sykesville, Maryland. It's still on the internet. It's funny because a friend of ours, he was just a thief. He would just go in the back room if the safe was open. A lot of times it was. He would just get the money. And I'll tell you funny stories with him. He's the best thief in the world. I can go on and on. But anyway, when my father ran the union, that's when he went away on the violation. I went around, like I told you the same time before. Again, real power is something you take, and that's what I did. I went around and introduced myself to all the contractors, and I said, I know you're used to dealing with my dad. I says, but my dad isn't here now, but I'm his son. You're going to have to deal with me. And that's what they did. And New York didn't intervene because the envelopes were very heavy that I would bring in. They were thick as telephone books. So they just kept me there. And I had all the blessings. And that's how my power began, by running the labor union and doing the right thing.
Okay, so now what you find out, because now I'm getting more intrigued about the Jersey side, and we discussed I was in a little bit of the printing business out in Jersey, right by the Budweiser plant at the time. New Jersey had such a big bond with New York that if you weren't, in the main line of everything, you really didn't know. So you guys basically controlled everything out on that end. I mean, it was like, okay, we got the connection in New York. He's our boss. We respect our bosses. But you guys had just the strongest crew as anybody in the metropolitan area.
Especially from the Silver Lake section of Belleville, where I'm from. There was only maybe like what my father, CABERT, Buddy Mussagrasso, his brother Sonny, and several other guys. Who was it? Ralphie Rosania, Silvio DeVita. They were like guys. They were only like 9 strong, but they were like an army of 100. Like they were like legendary. Trust me. Our area had it locked down. Believe me.
All right. So
I don't know where the Jews were from.
You guys, a lot of power out there, and a lot of say coming into New York about what was going on at that time with everything running out there. I mean, there was a question that came up to Frankie Lucchese one time about New Jersey and a couple of construction plants. He goes, "We don't have to worry about bringing anybody from New York. We got a strong crew out in Jersey. They can handle it. Worry about New York at the time." And that's exactly what they were told. And now I'm starting to think, by watching this worm Gravano and listening to Gravano and listening to other people talk about him, when he tried to drag Frankie Lucchese out there to start looking at construction plants and everything, it was just about greed. Because when John found out, he made it clear. He goes, "I got 2 gentlemen out there, 3 gentlemen actually, your dad, CABERT, and little Sammy." He goes, "We don't need your input out there. Stay here." And that caused a big riff in the Ravenite, one night, and it's even on the tape. When he asked Frankie Lucchese, "Why you guys keep going to Jersey?" He goes, "And I didn't even know about this meeting," because John had no knowledge that Gravano grabbed Lucchese to go out there and start looking at things. And once John got a hold of it again, he was like, "Leave them guys in charge." He goes, "You got 4 or 5 real respected guys out there. We don't need to go there." He goes, "They're just as good as you. They're our brothers." So yeah, there was a lot of connection between you guys in New York that is becoming clearer and clearer to me, because I was young back then. You got to remember, before he went away. But what was the highest you got to in that laborers union? You were running the whole ball, correct?
Yes, I controlled. I was like the business manager, but without my name being on the business card. In other words, I had to have somebody else have that title. It was a kid. He was in the pagan motorcycle gang, but he was away with CABERT, and they all liked him. So I made him the business manager, but I did get the blessing from my guy at the time, and he's still alive. That's why I'm not saying exactly who my guy was, but we had to go to his house, and we had to get permission from him to let at that time to let Tony's son step down in name and then put this kid in. Because the night that he was voted in, it was like a funny story because here's their 700 members of the Labor's local 342. So we have it. Whereas the president is of the executive board, Big Jim. He stands up and says on past Saturday, Brother James stepped down, gave a letter to the executive board saying that for personal reasons he's no longer going to be available. So we're going to nominate Brother so-and-so to be the new business manager. So all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Me and this other kid were walking around with two bats in our hand. If anybody put their arm up, that arm was going to get broken off. They knew better than to even make one opposition vote. And so with that, the polls were only open for like 2 minutes, and we had a new business manager. But I was actually the one that did everything and okayed everything. But the other guy was only there, but he was only in name only because I could never hold the title. I can never hold the job that's AFL CIO AFL affiliated because they didn't want me there.
Well, not only that, by that time you had already been convicted of a felony, correct?
Yeah, no, it was, but then again, they already knew the scuttlebutt. They knew, like this guy, Dick Roth, his name was, he was from the Inspector General's office of the Laborers International. He was going around and investigating me about how many books I sold, this and that. And this guy was really, really like right on my case, so they knew, but I could never hold the job. I could never, in other words, I had a job where I would go pick up my check every week, but I really couldn't have a job per se. I had to be looked upon like a guy for as a consultant or that kind of title, like for a company man or something,
All right, so let me ask you this question. We're talking roughly around what year in the 80s were you starting to make?
No, this is in the 90s now. Remember, I had told you that around 94 I took over. So this is like 94, 95, 96, 97. This was around there, around that time.
We're saying it started around 30 years ago. So you got to remember, in 94, wages were different, obviously, than they are to now and big thing. What were you pulling in a week through that union, personally?
Well, it was like $22 for an hour to pay a laborer. So you would make about 800 and change gross in your pay, and the other $400 would be in the back end. Your dues, check off, the unemployment. What is the other stuff? T, I'm losing it for a second.
Take out your medical. They pay the medical.
Annuities,
yes,
annuities, supplementary.
Yes, all your benefits, all that stuff. Right, that's $400 that you don't see. You don't see that part of it in your paycheck, but you see about $800 plus gross in your side. Then that gets taxed. But it was like $22 an hour. Shop steward would make a little bit more. Like I had the secretary treasurer would go every Thursday night. Now he would go into the pension and welfare office, and he would, if I told him to help a certain contractor out, that he would pay me. The contractor would pay me if he didn't want to pay the benefits. Let's say on the money that he did for us for 342. Let's say he owed $15,000 in benefits. He'd say, "Well, can I get away with it?" I says, "Yeah, you can get away with it. You give me $5,000, and then every Thursday night when my man goes in, the secretary treasurer, he'll go in there, and then any shop steward reports that are under your file, he'll just pull them out, and the ladies won't have nothing to bill you with." You follow me? In other words, what I did was against Taft-Hartley, but I went away for it. That's why I can talk about it. Naturally, it's not right to do, but that's what New York loved about me, because I knew how to make all the angles, make all the extra money.
Right. Now, you also had to negotiate with the owners of the company as shop stewards, business agents, running the union and stuff like that. Now, I remember in the printers union, the owners were getting killed when they had to pay into our medical, into our retirement, into our disability fund. I mean, we had a lot of funds that they were
That's
matching.
where all the money is. That's the heavy number, more than the hourly wage.
Well, that's the
Right. So
pension and
everybody's
welfare
saying,
office.
Yeah.
right. And I
Yeah, the
don't think
pension and
really
welfare
workers,
office.
correct. And I don't think workers really understand it until you actually start working and you're in there for a while and you're saying, well, I'm bringing home more money than you and you're in a union. Absolutely not. I have my retirement, my medical, my family's medical. I got everybody.
Vacation fund,
Your annuity, your annuity
supplementary,
is strong.
stamps,
They're supposed to
vacation.
go dollar for dollar. The contractor is
Right.
supposed to pay dollar for dollar of how many hours worked, and that's like a separate bank account for you. Now, there's another way I used to make the money. I used to make the money a different way. I would go to the bank where the 342 money was kept for everything, for all the workers. I would go to the bank and go to the bank president and say, listen, I got all this money. I got a couple of $1 million in here, 2-3 million in here. I said, I'll go somewhere else. I want to get I want to get something for bringing you this account. So they would be like 4%, 4.5%, and I would get that every month for keeping that money in that bank.
Now that's what a lot of people don't understand. The negotiations that the guys will say, we'll call them the guys like you, okay, at that time, they had to work with the banks, they had to work with the owners, they had to work with sometimes the guys who would supply you, the outdoor vendors, if they wanted to bring in, we'll say in the printers union, maybe you could clarify it in the laborers union. Let me sell you my ink and I'll give you such and such over here. So now if you had vendors coming onto the site for materials, we'll say at that time, did you also do well with them making money on the side?
Let's say vendors per se, like, well, let's say there was Colonial Concrete. You can use this guy's concrete or the terrazzo for the floor, the hard tiles. Like it depends on what it was, but it wasn't mostly there because I would get paid for every yard of concrete poured also. So that was a big. So that's why I couldn't wait to wake up 5 o'clock in the morning every day.
Well, back then, I mean, the money that was coming in, if you had a higher position, forget about the salary. It was all the money you were making on the sides for certain people here and there.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Economical. The salary. A lot of guys back then threw their checks at their wives because they were bringing home boatloads of money in other aspects back then. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Like at night.
Yeah, well, it depends. Well, I never believed in just handing in my paycheck to my wife. So I
never did that.
I was
not me.
Not me.
No, I could tell you. I mean, I knew what the base salary was that we were getting, and I was only the press tender at the time. Yeah, tender operator pressman in the printers union. But the money I was getting for jockeying around the ink, the paper contracts, you had to buy gas and alcohol to clean the presses down with. I mean, any little thing became an astronomical amount of money at the end of every month when you met with these guys. Not only would they take you to a 5-star restaurant, you were getting an envelope every month from 6-7 different people, and that's a low number compared to the laborers union. I mean, you guys had concrete, everything you guys had on that job site. I mean, it was ridiculous. You must have been home and bringing home boxes of money every few months.
Oh, I was doing very well.
Yeah, these guys who work non-union don't understand the benefits and luxuries that you have with a union job because of guys that were in your position. Do you have any, for instance, we'll say, like where you helped a guy out that you didn't even know, but he was a member of the union, and you just went to battle for him? Like, was anybody ever going to lose their job and you stopped it because you were a union and the owners could not do what they wanted to do all the time?
No, there was times when we helped fellow brother laborers where, let's say, they didn't have their benefits yet. They had to have so many hours. Like you would need 500 hours, something like that for every 6 months, and then you only need another 300 hours to keep it going, to roll it over. So some guys didn't have it because some of the contractors didn't actually pay what they were supposed to pay into as far as the benefit money. They were behind. So I would get on those contracts and say, listen, you ain't going to work on my territory unless you put up an escrow the benefit money that you, first of all, that you bid this job on this number on this job site, this bid that you put in estimate we would estimate the cost of the labor and all that, and I'd say, now based on that, you're going to give 50% in held in escrow towards the benefits, so you don't skip out on the benefits. But there was times where some of the guys, let's say their wives or their kids were sick, and they needed an operation or something like that. We would come to that benefit, and when we would put our heads together again with the blessing of New York, and we would do the right thing and help that person. Yes.
All right. Let's clarify how it kind of was the chain of command with power. So now you guys ran everything, but you still got the blessing from New York. It's like you say. When you were there in the 80s, do you remember who you dealt with in the 80s? Like from 84, 85 up to 90, we'll say.
Well, I didn't have the power that I had until the early 90s. Like I told you, around 90, 93, 94, it started. So it wasn't, I didn't have that in the 80s.
All right, so let's jump into the 90s then. By the 90s, pretty much the man that we're hearing, and nobody really gives him credit, but he was a great guy, and he was a loyal guy. Jackie D'Amico, Jackie the Nose, pretty much was the guy that you dealt with at that time, correct?
Oh, without a doubt, yes. Yes.
Okay, so let's try and...
Yeah, he lived in Hillsdale, New Jersey.
Right, so Jackie had already lived out in Jersey, but Jackie wasn't with the Jersey fact. Jackie was a New York member. And with a lot of people don't understand...
Jackie was in charge of all the New York guys.
Right. But what a lot of people also don't get, Jackie was a bus driver, and John took a liking to him, and he really moved up because he was still working up until John came into power, believe it or not. He had retired the year John took over. So now a lot of people say, well, Jackie was just a guy in a nice suit who went around with John. Not true. Why don't you give us a little example about how you interacted with yourself and Jackie at the time in the 90s?
Oh. Well, when I would see him, I would go with my guy. My guy would bring me to see him. He never asked to see me by himself. In other words, at that time it was different. In other words, my guy who I answered to here out in Jersey, we would always meet the three of us all the time. A lot of times it mostly would be Fort Lee. It would be I remember a Chinese right on Lemoyne Avenue. I remember I think there was a Chinese restaurant. We used to meet over there. And every time we left, we would always have to leave separately because there'd always be a van coming by looking to get a picture of all of us together. And a lot of times it'd be on Knapp Street in Brooklyn. And Randazzo's was another place we would have to meet. But a lot of times it would never be one-on-one. My envelope, I would give to my guy, and then my guy would give it to him. So I would never question nothing because, hopefully he's giving me credit for every dollar, but I don't know if anything was different, by the time he got it. I don't know.
All right. So let me ask you this.
I never questioned it.
All right. So we have Dave T from the Laborers Union. He was a big laborer up in the Boston area. All right. A lot of companies weren't paying in to the pensions and to all them funds that we had in the day, and they'd have to get squeezed out and not allowed to bid on any more jobs till they paid. Could you explain a little bit about that? Like how if a company, let's say an owner
you could put them on hold, number one, or secondly, a lot of times I'd let the guy get the bid, let the guy start, then I would put up a picket line. And that's how I set up a picket line, and I say, no, nobody's moving unless you pay these benefits. Otherwise, you're not going, so consider it a loss because this is not going to go away. I'm not going to forget about it. So I put up a damn picket line, and that's something he would pay. Trust me, he would pay. One guy had to fly over because he was trying to pour concrete in the Newark airport for the Hertz Rent-A-Car Company. These barriers up there for level parking, right? He was a Jewish guy. I made him go all the way out to take a shuttle flight to Boston, where his company was, to go get the money. Then he came back, and he also came back with an extra $6,000 for labor harmony for me to make things more smooth.
Yeah, so we had a lot of the same problems, but we always had guys knocking on our doors to for supplies. Look, let me supply you. Just get me in the door, and I'll take care of this, this, and that. And that was a big part of it.
No. A lot of times that's all lip service. They got to go in their pocket. You got to show me that you mean business by actually going in your pocket, pal. Otherwise, there's going to be a problem. You know.
I remember when my dad met with an ink company one time. They had to give him money just to show up at the meeting, and then we'll talk from there. And you always had to go in your pocket. Now, did you have levels in the laborers union like there were in other unions? Like you come in as an apprentice, and then you go step 1, step 2, and then you're like senior, or was it just based on seniority?
No, not in the laborers union. In the carpenters union, first you got to be an apprentice, and then you have to be journeyman and all that, and whatever it goes. There's steps there, but a laborer, no, you don't have. You're basically just like a janitor. You're a cleanup guy after every other trade. Like I said, the carpenter's there, jagged pieces of sheetrock fall to the floor. The laborer sweeps it up, puts it in the buggy, puts it out to the dumpster. And it's the same thing for masons. Any bit of chopped up cinder block or whatever, they got to sweep it up. You're basically a cleanup guy. So there really isn't a level, or there's no school, to become a laborer, nothing like that. There's no levels, Tony. Right. There's no levels.
But that's really the heart and soul of the damn union, because without laborers, you're not going nowhere. You need those laborers to get the job done.
Yes, you have to. Anything from 5 feet and in from the curb, it's designated union. You have to use union labor. It's called. Anyway, it's I forget the word. It starts with a C. I'm just forgetting right now. Anything from the curb, 5 feet from the curb and in, that's considered union work, and they have to do it. When they bid the job union. Like I said, my formula was 3% of the contract and $1,000 a floor, which was nothing. If it's $1 million, I get $30,000 to fix the labor. So I might just give you a shop steward, and the rest of the guys could be scabs. See, people don't realize how much, when a guy, he's only working, a contractor's only making 7%, 7 to 9% on profit on a job. But when you save money in labor, that's like you're giving him another 40% in his pocket. It's like he's got a lemonade stand in your backyard. He's able to do anything he wants. The guy saves. They want to work in your in your territory. They can't wait. That's how it is.
Okay.
Hey, Tony.
Go ahead, Craig.
I just wanted, because I know, Jimmy starting to get hungry. I know the hunger pains. I can hear him from here. I just want to say, I get this question a lot for you. Any great words of advice or funny things you could share with us? Maybe CABERT ever shared with you?
Oh yeah, CABERT was funny.
Give us one. Give us one.
He was funny. He would say, he'd have this raspy voice, So he would say, he says, Jimmy, let me ask you something. He says, you want to go to work? He says, why would a person want to go to work? Let's think about this. You got to sleep 8 hours, 24 hours a day. You got to sleep 8 hours to work 8 hours. Now it takes you an hour in the morning for breakfast to travel to the job. Now you take another hour for lunch, right? So 16 hours, that's 18 hours. Now another hour to get home. That's 19 hours. And God forbid if you work any overtime, what the hell did you accomplish in one day? And I'm saying to myself when I was young, I said, this guy's correct. What would I accomplish? I'm better off not working. He goes, Jimmy, you gotta like your wife. You gotta be in the iron and steel business. I said, what do you mean, Bobby? He goes, well, you got to go out and steal. Your wife irons, and you go out and steal.
That's classic.
That's the iron and steel.
And when
I got a question here from Dave T with the Boston Laborers Union.
Go ahead.
Back then, they didn't have these programs, but he's saying now they have programs.
Yes.
The apprentice programs, and teach demo work, running air, hammers, site work, etc. Did you have any of them programs in the 80s? I don't remember them at all, to be honest with you.
I don't know. I got it in 85. No.
All right, so let's go to this step. Your dad was released in 88, if I'm correct?
Good question.
88, 89, he came home, yes.
All right, your dad came home in 88. How's that? I just got a text. And your dad was made the same night If it's your dad became a member the same night as John Jr., Mikey Scuzz, Bobby Borriello, and Joe D'Angelo. Is that correct?
Well, little Sammy was there. Was 6 of them.
Right. Okay. So now you became pretty powerful in the laborers union in the early 90s, going into the mid 90s and kind of the late 90s. Do you think
Yes.
Membership really has its privileges, if you know what I mean, at that time? With your dad being in a new position, did that benefit you? Excuse me. Or were you already solidified, do you think?
No, I was solidified because of my earning power. That's what made me get solidified from bringing in them envelopes. That's how it works. You're really well. In other words,
Right, so,
you could be somebody's son. That means the door is unlocked. But to make the door swing open, you got to prove yourself. You got to go out there and prove yourself.
Absolutely. I mean, there wasn't probably a businessman as smart as Tommy Gambino, but his father knew he wasn't ready to lead the rest of that family. Tommy Gambino was probably the wealthiest guy with investments and everything.
Sure, with the garment center. Sure.
Right, with the garment.
I had a guy Richie worked for him. This is back in 1983. That's when I started directing the adult films. He worked for him in there, but Richie was the one that had financed every movie that we made. But we had, again, Arthur Marowitz and Howard Farber. They used to own Video Shack. That's before there was Blockbuster, and they owned the top 5 adult theaters in Manhattan. We had distribution all over the world. We had it. The money that I made, I was 26 years old. I remember I made $36,000. It only took 5 days to make the movie. But then we had Joe Sarno. He was the guy that edited every one of those films with the music. Because a lot of times you don't know it, but there's somebody speaking to the actors or to the girls as they're performing, we'll say, telling them, do this or move your hair. I can't see this or that,
Tony, Tony, Jimmy, I got somebody that just popped up backstage. I think he's got a little issue with you, Jimmy. You want to clear this up, Tony, on camera? Or should we?
Who is it?
I'll tell you right now. Bring him to the stage right now. One second.
Issue?
Yeah, he's got an issue with you. Yeah, with you, Jimmy.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, we'll find out in a minute.
Oh, you got any issues? We got a tough crew right here. I'm not worried about this. Craig, his issue will be gone by the time you get him back up on stage.
Yeah, I'm trying to get the layout.
Let's put him up.
We trying, brother. We trying.
Yeah, but you giving people a format to.
Hold on a minute, guys.
Uh-oh.
Oh, look at here.
I better run.
Mr. Larry Roller. Larry, what's on your mind, buddy? What can we do for you tonight? I mean, you can't pop in like this, Larry.
I don't want no trouble. I don't want no trouble.
You gotta ask me a question. If he made a wrong turn.
I don't know. He's right there. Talk to him.
I'm getting threats from your fan club over here. I get 15, 20 emails a day. Where's Jimmy? Where's Jimmy? Where's Jimmy? And I get an email. I see on YouTube that you're going to be on Craig's show, and I'm getting threats from your fan club.
Well,
Tony, what do you think?
you allowed me to help out a friend and do the show. So I thought you were in California, Larry.
I wish I was in California. It came very, very close, but they wanted cut the video down from 5 minutes to 3 minutes, so we had to cut a few things and add a few things. No, I'm very happy that you're there, and I watched the last podcast. You're doing a good job over there. You're doing a good job with these guys.
Larry, I told Tony
thank you, Larry. You know, but my home, your house is my first home. You know that.
What's up, Larry? How are you?
Hi, Tony. We never met, but I see you on the podcast, and you took Jimmy to task. You asked him a lot of questions, and you asked questions that I never asked him. To me, him and his father were like family. So when I was with the horses, they were doing their thing, whatever their thing was. It didn't bother me, and so now we just have coffee, we have lunch, and when I started my podcast, I asked Jimmy if he would come on with me, anticipating that the movie or the TV show based on my life would come about, and maybe I could help him out and get him a part in there, and that's what we're working on. But I'm glad I'm dealing with the problem I have, and I mentioned it to Jimmy. The problem I have is that we have like 1,700 subscribers, and it just don't ever seem to go up, mainly because I stopped with all the mob stuff, which I want to do 50-50 mob and horse racing and horse fixing, and that's why I asked Jimmy to join me. But then I got swamped with requests to continue with the horse stuff, and then I got involved with the people from Australia in the horse racing business. And that's what I've been doing the last two nights. I did podcasts with them, with the leading driver and trainer in Australia, with the best horse in Australia. So that's what's been keeping me busy, Jimmy. That's why I haven't been in touch with you.
Larry, let me ask you a question, Larry.
Go ahead.
I went and watched 6 of them on the bicycle at the gym this week. All right, and I watched a couple when I was in New York the night that you said some nice things about us over here. You're just as interesting as a lot of people. Did you ever think you might need somebody to ask you questions? I'm not volunteering or not, but I'm saying you have such an interesting story. You're juggling a few different things. I think you got to kill a show there. I really do.
Everything is breaking up, guys.
You know what? You just hit it right on the head. The problem is, if I need somebody to ask me a question. Yesterday, I interviewed the leading driver in Australia with the best horse in the world, and I was fumbling all over the place. I'm not good at asking questions. I'm only good at responding to questions.
Can I explain that to you? What I learned, and I learned this from a gentleman in New Jersey who taught me basically how to do what we do here. You're a star. You're not the question asker. So you need to be able to concentrate on being the celebrity, the gentleman answering the questions, and not doing both.
You're 1,000% right. Because every time I have to ask a question, I screw up. The other problem I have, and it's a major problem, I told Jimmy when he first started, when we first started the podcast.
Anybody can drop Larry's link. Drop it, please. Go ahead.
What's that?
We're going to drop Larry's link. Don't worry about it. Go ahead. Continue, Larry.
I asked Jimmy when we first started. I said I lose concentration. I'm at the age now where I forget a lot. I dribble. I do everything old people do. And if you interrupt me, I'm going to lose my train of thought. And Jimmy follows instructions so well that the first podcast or two, he just sat there. And then I got swamped by everybody that was watching saying, why do you have Jimmy there if you're not going to let him speak? Because I used to shut him down all the time. So after getting swamped, I said, Jimmy, you have to interrupt me more and more and more. Whenever you feel you could just come right in. And that's what he started to do. And then I lose my train of thought and I screw up everything. So it's a situation where an old man it's the old man show, meaning me. I forget. I'm not good at this stuff. And
I don't think you forget. I think you got too much on your shoulders for the one show, because I think you got a lot of great stories to go back on. I mean, how many years? You're talking about 60 years of stories, and you're trying to ask yourself the question and answer yourself the question. I think you can go a long ways with people bringing it out to you and then you explaining it.
You're 1,000% right. The problem is Jimmy knows everything there is to know about what you're asking him. Jimmy knows very, very little. After probably 2 or 3 questions, he would run out of substantive things to ask me, that pertaining to the horse business, pertaining to training and everything else. I'm just assuming that. Maybe I'm wrong, but you're 1,000% right. Jimmy should be asking me questions. And another mistake I make, and Jimmy can tell you this, when we do these podcasts, we do 2 or 3 in one evening, and we just change our shirts and everything, and we do 2 or 3 in one evening.
Right.
And the problem is, we come down here as Tom is setting up all the cameras. Jimmy says to me, "What are we going to talk about?" And I says, "I have no idea. I do not prepare. I don't do anything. I have no notes. I have nothing. I just, when Tom says the camera's on, just before he says, Tom says, 'Are you ready?' And I say, 'Jimmy, you ready? What are we going to talk about?' 'I don't know.' But as soon as, and then I start. So I should be a little bit more prepared. And what's a good thing is what you just mentioned. I should write down a bunch of questions that Jimmy can ask me pertaining to the horse business, and maybe 1 or 2 with the mob. Like he could ask me, how'd you ever get in touch with Gotti to get that horse for Gotti? Something like that, which involves the mob, it involves horses and everything. You're right. That's a good idea. That's what we should do.
Let me ask you a question. We'll see if this rings a bell. I remember a story with Carmen Abatello. You remember him?
Of course.
Okay, Carmen Abatello actually got worked over a little bit, I believe, out in Roosevelt Raceway one night. You remember that?
Well, that was Buddy Gilmore, but I don't know about Carmine.
Maybe it was Buddy Gilmore, but I know Abatello had something to do around the track.
Oh, he was in the same. All right, go ahead.
All right. No, I don't know. I'm asking you. I'm just telling you by what I heard. I wasn't a member of any of that.
It was Buddy Gilmore. Buddy Gilmore's a really good guy, fun guy, good guy, top driver, top trainer, very, very good. And his whole family. I mean, I raced with his brother George and his brother John. And in fact, I sold one of my homes in Florida to George Gilmore, his Buddy's brother. And Buddy.
So what I'm saying is, I seen when you talked about a little bit around that time, but you didn't go into the story. And what you're giving us right now is actually great stuff that you can be able to answer it. And you had that knowledge click right there when I have a little bit of the story, scrambled, because I was really young back then when that happened. But you know the whole story, and that's something that people would want to hear.
I could talk about it right now because Buddy died. Buddy's gone, and George is gone, and John is gone. All his brothers are gone. So, well, he has one brother that's left. But Buddy, what happened was, the mob basically controlled, I shouldn't say controlled, but they had a lot to do with a lot of races at Roosevelt and Yonkers Raceway. And every once in a while, you get friendly with them. They show up at the track. They show up at the nightclubs where you go after the races. And Buddy was Buddy and all them guys were they enjoyed dinner after the races and a few drinks, and naturally you get involved with these guys, and every once in a while you may do something with and so one day they had a race set up, and Buddy was supposed to finish second, and he made it look good, and he won, and they met the gang. They took him across the street to the Island Inn, and they just made sure that he never did it again. They busted him up pretty good, but that's what happens every once in a while. That's what happens, and it's unfortunate that the people that do this, because I know better than all of them, because I did it more than all of them, and I told the guy I was with that the guy I put there. If somebody runs over the money, just leave them alone. We'll make it up next week. Just leave it up to me. You don't go roughing these guys up. And unfortunately, some of them guys in New York, that's what they did. And that's the story of Buddy Gilmore, one of them. But it was Buddy. It wasn't Carmine.
And that's what I enjoy about listening to the way you explain something and having the time to explain it instead of asking it and explaining it. I think you do a great job explaining stories like that.
Absolutely.
And
Really
I feel a little comfortable saying this stuff because number one, it was everybody in racing knows what happened. So I mean, I'm not saying something nobody knows about. I try to leave names out. I try to talk about stories that were already in the newspapers. But if there was 100 that was in the newspapers, there were 100,000 that were not in the newspapers that I could talk about. And sometimes I feel funny about talking about them. I got to wait either till they're dead, but then they have wives that are. It's just tough. I didn't think it would be this tough, but it is, and I try to do my best not to. Like I just got a phone call. In the back of my book, I have about maybe 30 pictures. I was invited to Roosevelt Raceway reunion about 5-6 years ago. And I took a picture with just about every leading harness driver and trainer that raced in New York and New Jersey. And I had to put it in my book. I put all of these guys who are the greatest in the world never had anything to do with any of the races that I fixed or that I was in. Because they're all good guys. They're all great guys. And I chose a different lane. And I did what I had to do to I didn't do it to save money. I didn't do it to make money. I did it to save my life. Jimmy knows the whole story. And I finally got myself out of it. And through some friends convinced me to write this book. And out of sheer boredom, I wrote the book and I self-published it. And within a week, I was sent for to California to do the movie. And the rest is history. So now we just turned into a TV series, and my story has to come out, and I just have to be. I got to be careful what I say and how I say it because I feel terrible, even though it's been 30, 40, 50 years ago. And 90% of what's in the book was in the papers. But there's so many stories that because when I sat down and talked with Nicholas Pileggi and Richard Price and the people from Paul Bernard and the people from Village Road, Steve Moscow, and I sat there with them and they started asking me questions. We were there for 4, 5, 6 hours in Peter Luger's, and they were amazed of what goes on. But a lot of them stories I can't tell, and a lot of them I won't tell them, but there's enough that I could tell to make a series that'll last 20 years. So,
yeah,
but
I think that's great. I think that's great that you can answer it like that. And I think, you really got something, even with the podcast, as well as whatever else you do, if it's orchestrated a little bit more, where you can actually sit back and express yourself and answer it a little better.
Absolutely.
The other sad part is that a friend of mine yesterday called me up and he says, why can't you get some drivers on your podcast? And I have to tell you that everybody in racing knew of my situation as it was happening, especially from 70 to 78. They all knew I was in so much trouble, and I had the protection of Charles Slutsky, who owned the racetrack where I was at, and I basically had a free hand to do whatever I wanted, and he basically controlled the judges at the track, and they left me alone. So everybody knew of what I was doing. In 78, a situation happened where I was able to pay back close to $500,000-$600,000 to my friend Jimmy, there's pal, and that drama was over, and I switched from one lane to the other lane. The only problem was it was like bumper cars. When I tried to switch into the good lane, they kept pushing me back. Like, your reputation precedes you, and it was very, very tough. But I overcame it, and I got lucky. And within 4 years, I was back up to close to 100 horses in training. I bought a training center. I had 7 homes, another $1 million in the bank. And then Charles Susky died. Charles Susky was my savior that owned Yonkers Raceway. And when he died, there was no more, there was nobody there to protect me. And here they came, and they got me. And that was the end of my story. And but in between, in them 15 years in between, there were things that happened that, like Pileggi said, that if you took Goodfellas, The Godfather, Casino, and the Bronx Tale, and put them all into, and Wall Street, and put them all into one, that's my story. Now, to me, that was basically my life. And I could talk about it forever. And in private, I could tell you things that I wouldn't say on a podcast, and I wouldn't say, and I'm battling with them right now because they want more girls into the situation.
I tell you what, there's a date that was pretty big back in the 70s, and I wasn't around. I was only 4 years old at the time, but I read a lot about it. December 20th, 1973. Do you remember when they had the big indictment on Yonkers and they arrested, I think, 23 or 24 people back then? That's something I'd like to talk to you about off the air if you ever have.
I could talk about it on the air because I did a podcast about it, and I didn't have to mention any names. But what was great about that was that they were fixing the super perfecta all the time in Yonkers and Roosevelt. And as soon as one really bad race happened, I mean, the favorites finished out of the money, the long shots won, the superfecta should have paid, or maybe it was a trifecta. It was a trifecta. Trifecta should have paid.
Yeah, they only paid 192. Yeah,
and it paid 192. Well, the whole grandstand went nuts. And Tim Rooney, Art Rooney's son, was running the racetrack at the time, so naturally they had a big investigation, and that was one of the first investigations they had back in '73, and they called everybody in. They started a whole big investigation, and they stopped and it was all in the newspapers and everything. So between the Racing Commission, the newspapers, and Tim Rooney, they kept pursuing this, and it started to word was starting to get out that harness racing was fixed. And so Tim Rooney's father, made one phone call to Tim Rooney, his son, and he said, "Hey," he says, "there's a lot of money invested here. You keep up with your bullshit, and everybody's going to think all these races are fixed. We're going to have to close the doors. So just stop." And he made another phone call to the Racing Commission and newspapers, and he was a powerful guy back then, from bootlegging to numbers to everything. And he did it by himself. He really wasn't hooked up with any mob. I mean, he may have had 1 or 2 talks with maybe Meyer Lansky or one of them guys, but he did it all by himself. And he was smart enough to know, clean up your dirty laundry in house, and they, right after that phone call, the whole thing was dropped. The drivers were cleared. Everything was cleared. They couldn't go on. They went on with the case, but they had no more evidence. They stopped the investigations. But now what they do is they're cannibalizing the whole industry with the new. And I understand what they're doing. They almost have to do it because the drugging of horses and the abuse of horses is so rampant now that they have to do something. But while they're trying to clean up the game, and I guess there's no real way to do it, they're cannibalizing it. They're borrowing top trainers that have millions of dollars worth of race horses. What are these owners of these horses supposed to do? What are these trainers supposed to do? So I think I know the answer, but nobody's going to listen to me. But they let it go too far. It's like having a splinter and not taking care of it, and before they have to amputate your arm because the whole thing is infected. And that's what.
Let me ask you one question. Do you remember a guy? And I read the whole book on him because I got interested in racing waiting for wrestling on Saturday night. So you had Roosevelt Raceway races replay at 11:15 to midnight. Then you had wrestling, and they had a little segment on a gentleman named Tony Murphy, the Irishman, the Irish millionaire of horse racing. So I actually read the documentary about him and his obsession of winning and what he would do to get that way. Do you remember him at all?
No.
Okay, he was the big scandal in the early 70s, mid 70s. It was called horse swapping, where they would try and do the bait and switch and swap the horses behind scenes. This guy was a lunatic. I mean, that's something that's amazing.
Well, that was Dr. Gerard and me.
Yeah, you did that, Larry. You did that.
Oh, wait a minute.
With the inspector.
Right. Now, Larry's name is in this, but they're saying the gentleman who funded it was an Irish millionaire named Tony Murphy, who was obsessed and nobody actually ever met. But your name is in this article that I have.
I could tell you this, and I'm kind of proud of it in a way, because whatever I did by myself ever since I was a kid. Ever since I was a kid, whatever I did, I robbed, I stole, I cheated, I lied, I made millions, I lost millions, I did it all by myself. One time in my life, when I was 17 years old, I was going to rob a gas station that had all these brand new transmission jacks that weighed like 200 pounds, because all the cars start going from standard transmissions to hydramatics and automatic, and they were heavy. So they had a grand opening, and I robbed the box truck the night before. I was all ready to go in there. He had a grand opening, rob all his new tires, his cash registers, thousands and thousands of dollars worth of stuff. The problem was I couldn't lift these jacks by myself, so I had to get a friend, and he was a good friend, somebody I trusted. And that was the only time I ever used anybody, and that was the only time in my life. 6 months after that, well, we sold it to one of my friends had a gas station out in Long Island, and 6 months later, this guy who owned the gas station that we robbed, he must have did this. He went around to every gas station and just looked around, and it was easy to spot these new transmission jacks. They were big, they were all bright red, and finally 6 months later he found them. And it came right back to me, and I went to Detective Sands, knocked on my door, 114 precinct, took me to precinct, and he says, sign this. And part of that confession was giving up my partner. And that was the biggest, worst beating I ever got in my life. Broke my jaw, fractured my head, knocked 2 teeth out, broke my ankle and 7 ribs. And that was the only time I ever did anything with somebody else. So when I switched horses, I did it by myself. I paid off the equipment guy in the paddock, and I did everything by myself. There was one other guy that did it, and that was the veterinarian, I think his name was Mark Gerard, in the 70s. He wound up getting caught. I won't go into his whole story. He had F. Lee Bailey try to defend him, but he wound up going to jail for, I think, a year or 2. And he was the only one I knew about switching horses, because that's a very tough thing to do, because they have an equipment guy and they have a tattoo guy that comes around to check the equipment, check the tattoo on the horse. And unless that guy's on your payroll, you can't do it. And not many people were able to do it, because if you weren't very friendly with the guy or made him an offer he couldn't refuse, he'd report you and you'd be barred for life. So,
you had the guy, Larry. Remember, you had the guy.
Well, I had the guy, yeah, because when you're at small racetracks, there's no money there. Everybody is basically living hand to mouth. It's just very, very tough. So if you go to a guy that's making $400 a week checking tattoos every night, and you go to him and say, listen, when you get to this horse, the tattoo may not be right. It's not your eyes, but here's $1,000. Keep moving. And for every horse I talk to you about, you'll get 1,000. So if I have 2 or 3 horses in the night, you're going to make 3,000. That's more money than you're going to make in 6 months. So it's easy to do it. And I was able to do it at Monticello, because if the guy turned down the offer, which them guys would never do that. Plus, I knew him. It would be Charles Slutsky, my best friend who owned the racetrack, that would have to confront me, and I'd say he's lying. And that's all. So I don't know of anybody else who switched horses because it's they come with the card, they come with the year he was born, the tattoo, the color of the horse, the white markings, and unless you have it locked up pretty good, and that guy's a good friend of yours, and you're taking care of him, that could never happen. But I did it, and Dr. Gerard did it. I don't know of anybody else who did it, and I've been around a long time.
Tony,
I think if hold on, Craig. I think if you guys mixed and matched and did it a little different, you'd have an absolute star show. I find it intriguing, and I got 4 of them downloaded to watch on my big screen TV.
and Larry, I just want to thank you.
A great job.
He's right. I just want to thank you so much for coming on tonight, talking more, and breaking chops and shaking Jimmy up. I could see him shook. And thank you for coming on.
It was my pleasure. And Jimmy, I'm sorry.
Jimmy's getting hungry.
I'm sorry I took so much of your time away.
No, I love you, man. You're welcome here all the time.
That's all right.
You're always welcome.
I
with
feel
us.
like I'm back in Lyndhurst.
All right.
Continue the good work you guys are doing.
Thank
and
you,
I
brother.
wish you a lot of luck. I'm
Thank
going to
you.
walk my dog.
All right.
Larry,
Thank
I
you.
love
Have a
you,
good
buddy.
weekend.
Thank you.
Good night.
Larry, call me when you're ready. Larry, call me.
So,
Tony, anything you want to say in closing with Jimmy?
Nah, I think we continue next week, and I think it's great to have both the gentlemen on there. They can teach us a lot and fill us in on a lot of history. Thank
Jimmy,
you so much, guys.
Love you,
Yeah,
man.
next time I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you a few stories next time. When I was with my friend from Boston, we used to rob all the stores. Funny, this guy. I'm telling you, what I would give him the time. You're going to love these stories.
Awesome.
Anyway, thank you again. Thank
Love
you,
you.
Craig. Thank you, Tony. Very nice to see you both. I love you guys, and God bless. And let's see you next time.
Absolutely.
See you soon, Jim.
Be well,
Thank
brother.
you.
Be well. Tony, I think we had another good show. I hope the chat enjoyed the show.
I think we had a real good show. Very good.
You want to do me the honor of saying a farewell and see you soon?
Well, I want to thank you guys all. I'm going to bring a few names. Gianni, Cinnamon Girl, Baywatcher, See No Evil is here tonight. Roy Munson, my man. You know, what else we got here? We got a lot of people in here tonight. We got 27 people.
Dave T.
This is really Baywatcher, Dave T.
Maureen Frick.
Good, Craig.
Dex Dallas. Yeah, no, I'm just trying to help you. The ones you missed.
Trying to get to the top of this. You know, we missed a few of them. I
Robert
apologize, but
Materna, Jimmy's wife.
it's growing more and more every week.
Brooklyn
We're
and
getting the
William.
number.
Thank
We're growing
you.
the
Detroit
numbers.
Stiggy.
We're growing the number, and we're going to get,
Maurice Reed.
you know, more
Gianni.
more stories that are all true. And I just want to thank you guys, and we'll get it to where you want it. And please send in questions, and we will ask
Absolutely.
them. You know, even if you got to hit it in a comment section.
Terry.
I read them. Craig
Thank you.
reads them. We'll get back to you.
Absolutely. I want to wish everybody a good night. Tony, I'll talk to you later. On that note, folks, here's this going out the door.
Thank you.